Before we get started, do either of you have any questions that you want to talk about real quick?
I would maybe just ask Jason, have you, I know that the grant money for the new construction homes under 450,000 is supposed to be available right now or very soon. Have you heard anything more about that?
I have not, no.
Okay, was just curious.
Yeah, I think it should be soon, but I don't know. I don't know the exact time.
Thanks.
Jeanette, did you have a question too?
No, I'm just driving, so I'm going to be listening. Okay. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. I've got a couple things that I want to go through. And a lot of times, some of these things that we talk about come from questions that agents bring up during the week. So hopefully maybe you have these same questions, or at least we can make it clear. So there's two different things I want to talk about. One is in our contract settlement. I'm actually going to share the settlement thing with you real quick, just so we can read it together and show you, because there's a misunderstanding of what needs to happen at settlement and closing. So we talked before about settlement and closing, not telling your client that they're going to closing, because we don't want them to show up to the title company with their moving van and expecting the keys right when you're done signing. It could happen at the signing, but more than likely it's not going to. So you don't want to set the wrong expectations. So a lot of it comes down to helping your clients understand what needs to happen before they actually get the keys. So I'm going to share this with you. Let's see. Okay, so this is just a normal REPC. And in section 3, it talks about the difference between settlement and closing. Section 3.1, settlement. The settlement shall take place no later than the settlement deadline referenced in section 24D, or as otherwise mutually agreed by buyer and seller in writing. Settlement shall occur only when all of the following have been completed. So this is where the confusion happens, is settlement occurs when all of the following have been completed. Sometimes we think that if we just go in and sign, that's everything that we need to do. You'll see here, section A, buyer and seller have signed and delivered to each other or the escrow closing office all documents required by the REPC, by the lender, by the title insurance and escrow offices, by written escrow instructions, including any split closing instructions if applicable, or by the applicable law. So basically that's the one side that I think everybody kind of gets. We go to the settlement, we go to the title company, we sign the papers, and then we should be good to go. The challenge is, the second part is where we get a little bit confused. And it's B, any monies required to be paid by buyer or seller under these documents, except for the proceeds of the loan, have been delivered by the buyer or the seller to the other party or to the escrow closing office in the form of cash, wire transfer, cashier's check, or other form of acceptable to the escrow closing office. So this is the funds that the buyer is bringing. So if they're doing a down payment and it's a significant down payment, that's when those need to be delivered. And the biggest thing that I've seen is this word here, have been delivered by the buyer and seller. So if you wait until the last minute of the settlement deadline, and then you have your client go over to wire their money over to the title company, and it doesn't get there until tomorrow because the wire doesn't go out that day, then you're actually not fulfilling the requirements of settlement. Or if they have a cashier's check that they need to go get, they never brought it in, or if they're assuming, I talked to one agent just recently, and they've heard that the funding, so the loan amount, it has 4 days to get to the title company after settlement, but that's for these proceeds right here, except for the proceeds of any loan. So that's the exception. It's not the buyer's funds or the seller's funds. It's the loan funds that have that exception. So anything that your buyers bring into the table, you make sure that they have it to the title company before the settlement deadline. And so what I would suggest is if you are doing a wire, maybe have them go wire it the day before. They should have the CD 3 days prior to even settling. So they're going to get their final loan estimate from their mortgage officer. They're going to have a CD. We're going to know what those final numbers are. We should know what those final numbers are within 3 days before we close. So there should be no reason we can't get that money to the title company by settlement deadline. So the question is, what happens if we don't complete our settlement deadline? Does anyone know what would happen if, let's say that the buyer doesn't fulfill this, they're waiting for their money to go the next day, and the seller decides that they're no longer going to sell the home? What's the problem? Well, other than they're not going to sell the home.
Well, the buyer would be considered in default because they are not fulfilling their obligation. And this is one thing I've had to deal with, that it's not that it's happened, but explaining to my buyers this, and then the title company. And a lot of people don't know this. So I think I'm really glad you're mentioning it, because a lot of people don't understand this part of this contract.
Well, and that's why I bring it up, because just last week we had an agent who had done everything that they wanted, that they were supposed to do, except for bringing the funds. And they were under the assumption that they had 4 days to get those funds to the title company, because that's when the loan would be funded. And the reality is that's not completing your settlement. So just be really careful with that. Closing, in contrast to that, it says for the purpose of the Rep C, closing means the settlement has been completed. So that's step one. Step two is the proceeds of any loan have been delivered to the lender, the seller, or the escrow officer. So that now the loan is, money's there. C, the application, applicable closing documents have been recorded. So that's the recording. That's what we normally talk about. And actions described in 3.2 and C shall be completed no later than 4 calendar days after settlement. So any one of those 4, they need to be completed within 4 calendar days after settlement. So settlement is kind of what we are really looking for as far as your responsibility as an agent. You've got to make sure that everything's done for that settlement deadline. And then within 4 days, these other things happen. Hopefully, once the money comes in, then they can just record and it all be done. But that's the distinction between the two, is your job is part of the settlement. Everything else comes together for closing. Okay.
That's a really good
So-
thought. I was just going to add, it's really good to tell your clients that you want to make sure on settlement day that, if they're expecting to fund and record, that it has to be, all those funds have to get there. So that's really important. But I really like that thought that you and Jeanette said, of telling reminding them that it's not the same as close. That settlement is not the same as close, and not to get to that end of, like if they can't do it till the end of the day. I don't know if I ever really thought of that. So thank you.
I think it's important that if you're not going to settlement until 3 or 4 o'clock, that you make sure that your client has those wiring instructions, however you're going to do that, and that they get that wire. They understand they have to do that wire, because many wire cutoff deadline dates at time is 2 o'clock. So if they're waiting till 3 or 4 o'clock to get wiring instructions that day, they're going to be in default technically. And I know a lot of times it doesn't get called out, but it could possibly.
Yeah, and a lot of that is, like, a lot of these things we bring up is not because we see it happen a lot, but I can tell you that if you're the agent on either the buying side or the selling side, that the deal gets canceled and you automatically see that it was something you did or you didn't do, that becomes a very stressful moment in your life. Just out of experience from agents I've talked to, that there's not a lot you can do if you need to have those funds and it's past the wiring time frame and the seller is looking for an excuse to get out. And we've all seen sellers and buyers looking for specific reasons to get out. And when you give them a specific reason, you got to be really careful. So our job as agents is to just make sure that that's understood by everybody. We also have a tendency as agents that we get used to using certain terms. So like for sell by owner, where we go FSBO or something like that, or contracts and deadlines and all of these things that we kind of take, they're just normal to us. And settlement and closing are one of those really specific ones where a normal person not in the real estate industry is not going to understand the difference. And so you're going to see people show up thinking, oh, I should have got the keys. If you as an agent put your settlement deadline on a Friday and you tell your client they're going to be able to move in the weekend, you're really setting yourself up for some disappointment and having to explain yourself if for some reason that deal doesn't fund and record by that day. In fact, I had one agent call me last Friday. They were the buyer was settling. They went in the morning. They wanted everything to go so they could fund. And then the seller wanted to have the weekend to move out and didn't tell the buyer and didn't sign the papers until 4 o'clock that night, basically assuring that they would not fund and record that Friday. So then that agent had to go back to their client and tell them, oh, by the way, you're not moving in. The seller is going to be there and it's not going to fund and record until Monday. So just be really careful with that, because some agents, like, I think the best thing that agent could have done is just said, hey, we don't want to record until Monday, so everybody was on the same page. But what actually happened was the seller's agent never even told the buyer's agent, our agent here in our company, that was what the plan was. It was actually the title company that said, oh, they don't want to sign until this evening, so they don't record until Monday, and everybody was kind of thrown off. So just be really careful with that with your clients.
So Jason, just to confirm that then on our end of things, for settlement, we just need to make sure the wire transfer and our clients sign by the end of that settlement date, but the recording can actually happen up to 4 days after that settlement date.
Correct. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so one other thing for today, I get a lot of questions about gifts and inducements and referral fees. So there's a difference between the two. Gift and inducements, basically I'm offering something to use my services. Okay, let's say that I'm going to pay for a home warranty, or I'm going to provide, let's go to the extreme. I'm going to provide airline tickets to somewhere. Can you do that as an agent?
I don't think so.
Are you saying, can you give a gift to like a buyer or whatever? Is that
You
what you're
can
saying?
give a gift, but you can't use that as a way to get their business,
Okay.
right?
So that's one of the distinctions that I want to make here is, so there's two different sides of it. There's a gift and there's an inducement. So what's an inducement? An inducement is enticing somebody to use your services. Okay, so if I say, hey, if you use my services, you get X or Y. Okay, that's an inducement and a gift, and it's actually legal to do. We can do that as agents. We can offer it. The only criteria that we have is we need to make sure that it is disclosed to the lender and it's accepted in their underwriting guidelines. So if you want to offer something to somebody to use your services, then you can do that. You just need to make sure that's all disclosed and everybody knows. So then you take it to the other side, where it's a referral. Okay, a referral. So if you refer somebody to me, there is a limit on what I can give you. And does anyone know what that amount is?
No.
Okay, so that amount is $250, and it's for a non-solicited referral. Okay, so basically I can't go to you, Jeanette, and say, hey, if you get me a referral, I'll give you $250. Or hey, if you get me a referral, I'll buy you movie tickets. I can't do I can't give it that way, but if you give me a referral and I give you something in return as a thank you, and it was unsolicited, meaning if I didn't give it to you, you'd still give me a referral, I can go up to $250. So there's two sides to this. One side is the gifts and inducements. If you're working with a client, you can do that for your clients. So a buyer or a seller that you are working with, you can give them part of your commission. You can give things back to them. Now, that goes along with the lender guidelines. I can't say, hey, I'm going to give you, cash back at closing, where the lender says, I don't want the buyer to get any cash back at closing. That's not going to work. But you can give them a gift, and there's not a limit on what that amount is. But when we're talking about a non-client, so somebody that I'm not working with, there is a limit, and that's $250. But I can't put it out there and say, if you use my services, then I will give you X or Y. Like, refer somebody to me and I'll give you free movie tickets. That won't work. But if somebody gives you a lead and you give them movie tickets under $250, you can do that. Okay. Do you see the
So
difference?
Jason,
Yeah.
oh, I was gonna ask you that is a change. That is more than it used to be, right? Because didn't it used to be less?
Yeah, it used to be 150. So now it's 200.
Okay. That's what I thought. I'm like,
I-
yeah, that sounds more.
I have a question.
Sure.
So sometimes after I get like a buyer broker agreement signed, I'll tell my buyers, we'll go over the real estate purchase contract. And I tell them, it's not so much now, but when the market used to be crazy, I say, so we don't have to ask for a home warranty. That's just something I'm going to give you. But it's after I'm already working with them and I haven't necessarily let the lender know. Is that like, how do you let the lender know that? I guess it's just, we just don't ask for it in the real estate purchase contract. And when it's closed, I just order it. Is that like
You
that?
order it after the transaction's already over.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd be really
Like I don't
careful.
order it through escrow because I'm paying for it. So I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe I should do that a different way. I mean, I've never done it intentionally to be like dishonest.
So
Or
I would be really careful with doing things outside of the closing.
well, it's
whether
kind of
it-
like a gift, like, thank
Mhm.
you.
Yeah, and that's where it's kind of lets this gray area of what gift needs to be disclosed. And basically
Yeah.
the rules are you need to disclose everything to the lender. There's nothing outside of that. So if it's, I'm giving a gift of a certain amount, they don't really look at that as like, you need to do that or you don't need to do that. I mean, it's all under, you need to disclose it. So
So how do you disclose it? By just telling them?
you can just tell them, you can let them know. I personally would say that you would probably want to put that on some escrow instructions and just pay for it at
Oh,
the
okay.
settlement so that it's out of there. The other advantage to that is anytime you take like your uniform warranty, if you pay for it or even if you had the seller pay for it and you reduce the commissions, then you're not actually getting, you wouldn't have to pay taxes on that one.
Okay. So I don't do it right now because the market's not the same as it was a year ago.
Yeah, and it really just comes down to if you're wanting to use those. I've seen that the questions that I keep coming up with is, can I give a gift? And the answer is yes. The question just comes in, is if they're not your client, then giving a gift has more rules to it. And it basically comes down to you can't go over 250,
Right.
and you can't have it as a solicitation for it.
Right.
Okay. So those are the two questions that I've had recently that was brought up. So I wanted to bring that up. So any questions on either of those, the settlement or the gifts, inducements, or referrals?
Not for me. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else you guys have questions about that we can talk about today? Real short stuff that I had today, but I thought it was important for you guys to hear.
I had one and I'm just trying to think what it was. I thought, oh, I'll ask at the end. And now I'm like, what was that? Well, I might be calling you.
Well, that's fine too. All right.
Thank you.
Any-
That was helpful. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank
Any
you.
Things? Okay, well, if not, then reach out if you guys have any questions.
Have a good weekend. Thanks.
Yep, thanks, Chris. Welcome, Aubrey. Aubrey, you missed, oh, you left.